Hello everyone and welcome to the Web Retailer webinar on driving online growth. I'm Andy Geldman, the founder of Web Retailer. Big thanks to all of you who've joined us today. We really appreciate that an hour out of your day is a big deal. So we've got a lot of really valuable content coming up and I think you'll enjoy it a lot. Please submit questions at any point during the presentation. You do that using the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel. I know it can be tempting to save your questions to the end, but it will really help us work with the questions and get ready for the Q&A if you can put them there in the question box whenever they come to mind. So what we've got for you today is a presentation from Michael Anderson of Retail Solutions. That'll take most of the time towards the end of the hour, and then we'll go on to the Q&A. We've got some extra time for the Q&A, so if you can stay longer than the hour, then you're really welcome to do that. And we'll get through as many of the questions as we can in an extra 30 minutes. If you can't stay that extra time, we are recording everything, so you'll get to hear Michael's answers to your questions in the recording if you can't stay. The questions box is also the place for any technical support, so if you can't hear us or you can't see what's going on, then use the question box there as well. So that's everything from me for now, and I'll just hand you over to Michael and he'll give you his talk.
All right, thanks Andy. All right, so again, thanks for joining today. Michael Anderson with Retail Solutions. Been around for about 6 years, and we've spent a lot of time in this space, so I'm really hopeful that the time here today for you will be well spent, because we've certainly learned a lot of lessons over the years. So what we're going to talk about here today is the 4 steps to sustainable and incrementally profitable growth. And oftentimes when I give a presentation, I like to kind of bring things back to core definitions. And so let's see, make sure my mouse is on here. There we go. So let's take a look at what that actually means when we talk about sustainable, incrementally profitable growth. So when we look at the actual definitions of the word, sustainable, of course, is able to last or continue for a long time. Incrementally is the process of increasing in number, size, quantity, or extent. Profit, hopefully everybody here knows what that is. And growth is an increase in size or value. So therefore, sustainable, incrementally profitable growth is an ongoing increase in business which increases in profitability as it grows and is maintainable over time. And that's really what we're after here. That's how you increase the value of your company, and obviously the profits continue to grow as a result. So what we're going to cover here today is essentially 4 stages of growth. 3 of them are for the most part sequential. The 4th is kind of always there, and that is, first we're going to talk about setting the foundation. Of course, in any house that you build, of course, you want your foundation first. You can't start building your second level before your foundation is set. We're going to talk about, once that foundation is in place, how do you optimize that? How do you get the most out of that foundation? How do you expand upon that foundation? So how do you add new suppliers? How do you deal with new sales channels, etc.? And then what do you need to do as you're managing this business going forward? And how do you go about doing that? So first, a little bit of context, and I promise you this is not a presentation about e-tail, but I think it is important that you understand that sort of our context, our filter on this world that we're kind of bringing to the table. So our platform does all these different things, right? So we deal with sales channel integrations, supplier integrations, order management, inventory control, product listing data and product listing management and creation, etc. A lot of data warehouse type of things for business intelligence. And then we have deep integrations to financial systems as well. So that's kind of the view that we bring to this world. Now, who our customers are, our average customer starting sizes last year was around $271,000 a month in sales. So as a company, we kind of focus on, I would call, maybe the mid to high volume space, and those are the types of customers we're serving. Average growth rate for our customers is 130% in the first year, and that's actually a 4-year average. So give or take, people are growing by a multiple of 2.3 from when they get started with us. So we've learned a lot along the ways, some of it good, some of it's bad, in terms of what the lessons that we learn. You know, a lot of the lessons and some of the most valuable lessons are what didn't work as well as what did work. So we're going to cover a lot of that here today. So when people come to us, what are some of the biggest pain points that they're experiencing, and what are the problems that they're trying to solve? Almost without fail, inventory management is a big deal across multiple channels. Managing that product content across multiple channels. Having issues with scaling operations. They know that there's an additional opportunity out there, but they don't feel like they can grow beyond where they're currently at. Missing out on market opportunities. So, you know, hey, I know a supplier who's got 20,000 SKUs that I could sell if I had some way to deal with it. And oftentimes an underlying problem here that's causing a lot of frustration to a lot of merchants is no visibility to or way to protect your true profitability of the business. So what have we learned? Overall, this message that we're going to talk about here today is really a message of getting back to basics. That doesn't always mean that it's a sexy message to preach, but in terms of the value that is being provided and what we really want to focus on so that we can scale, what we've learned is that operations itself isn't just an overhead expense. Operations becomes your catalyst for growth. So a lot of that begins with a mindset so as we start digging into the various stages. So quick little story. I met a guy about three and a half years or so ago who had just become a customer of ours, was doing about $65,000 a month in sales or so. We met at a little deli in New York, and we sat across the table from each other and had some small talk. The place was completely empty. It was just the two of us. And at a certain point in time, he kind of leans over and he goes, you know, Michael, I think this next year, after we've gotten everything set up, this next year we're going to do 20 million in sales. He goes, and then we're going to do 60 million in sales after that. And the year after that, we're going to do $100 million in sales. And I'm kind of looking around, and first it was he was whispering all this to me, and then I'm wanting to look in his coffee to see what he's drinking, because I'm thinking, boy, that's got to be some pretty good stuff. But the reality is what had happened is he now, having been on our platform for a little while, had started to understand how it was possible to be able to scale his business beyond what he had originally thought. We'll get back to some of the results of that conversation in a little bit. So I want to ask you a question. What would it take for you to achieve sustainable, incrementally profitable growth? Would it take new systems? Would it take more products to be able to sell? Would it take better processes? Would it take people, cash, time? Or oftentimes my favorite answer is yes, I need all of those different things in order to be able to scale. One of the things that we've learned is that growth is not accidental. You have to be intentional about this process. And oftentimes the challenge there is time or lack thereof. You know, you know what to do to grow, but you have to find the time to be able to do that. So it requires time, it requires focus, and it requires a plan. As I said, you know, most merchants know what to do to grow. This is not rocket science for the most part. If you're selling on multiple channels, you know that typically if you add more channels, that's going to help your growth. If you add more products, that's going to help your growth. If you spend time focusing on repricing and your pricing strategies across your different channels and getting more granular, getting more aggressive where you can, etc., that results in growth. There's a number of different things that are fairly well known that you can do to increase the size of your business. But the problem comes back to time. And it comes back to the fact that most merchants are so busy chasing their tail every day trying to keep up with operations that you don't have the time that it takes to focus on, hey, what do I need to learn about this new channel? What do I have to put in place to be able to service a new channel? All of these things, it takes time. And most merchants just simply don't have the time of the day. And adding staff isn't necessarily the answer. Matter of fact, your expenses, if you look at a P&L of a typical merchant business, you've got your cost of goods, and your cost of goods is obviously your number one expense, but your second biggest expense is your people. So if you're going to get to the point where you can grow at a rate where your expenses are not scaling at the same linear rate, in other words, you're increasing your profit over time, if you're going to be able to do that, adding people and throwing more people isn't really the solution. The answer is, of course, then we need to focus on setting a solid foundation. So now we're getting into kind of the meat of the presentation here. The underlying concept that is absolutely critical for scalability in a multi-channel world is understanding the power of relational data. So again, if we go back to definitions here, multi or multiple is having, relating to, or consisting of more than one. And when we look at multi-channel, right, we've got Amazon, we've got eBay, we've got Walmart, we've got Sears, Newegg, Rakuten, all these other channels, websites, deal-a-day sites, Groupon Goods, Living Social, etc. That's your multi, right? What you need, or that's your many, is you need a one-to-many relationship tied back to your SKUs so that you can manage all of those different channels and listings in an effective way. So you need what we call a single source of truth. So when we look at what that means, let's take a look specifically at the product catalog. When you're selling out on a sales channel, all listings are going to require some fairly basic information, right? They're going to require your descriptions, pictures, attributes, publishing controls. Each listing is going to have a price. It's going to have a unit of measure associated with it. Am I selling an each, or am I selling a 3-pack or a 10-pack, whatever? You need a cost, and you need a quantity available to sell. So there's all of this data that's required on an individual listing. What's important to understand about this one-to-many relationship is that some of this data is listing specific, right, and some of this is SKU specific. So when we use the term SKU, we use the most, the real definition of it. It's a stock keeping unit. That's what we're going to track inventory by. So when we look at what this actually means, or an example here, you've got your master SKU and a base unit of measure, and if you can set that up to manage your cost basis at the master SKU level and the base unit of measure, and your availability then at that master SKU level, and then have the ability to manage all of your individual listing content at the listing level, that gives you a tremendous amount of power. Because now if you sell something on listing A and that's an each, you can update your availability across all of your other channels because everything ties back to that master SKU. Very basic concept, but too often what we're seeing is that people will end up listing on multiple channels and the software, whatever they're using, doesn't have the ability to deal with all of the different content that's required at the listing level. And so they end up creating duplicate SKUs in whatever system it is, just so they can have the listing specific content. The problem with that then is that they're killing themselves trying to figure out how to do things like replenishment. But if you've got everything tied back to that master SKU, now you can do simplified multi-ASIN management or multi-channel listing management across all of your channels. You have real inventory visibility and velocity. And when we talk about velocity, that's all about replenishment. How much product do I order? If I'm only looking at one SKU at a time, and I've got, or sorry, one listing at a time because I've got multiple SKUs in my system set up, I've got to aggregate all of those sales together in order to be able to find out how much product am I actually moving per day, and then be able to figure out how much I should order. Global pricing controls. If your cost basis is managed at the master SKU level, you know what that cost is, and now you can make your pricing relative to that cost across all of your different channels. And if your cost basis changes, let's say you bought a container load of something and you got a 20% discount, if that changes, now you can effectively manage all of your channels and push those changes out. Streamlined purchasing and replenishment, I think I kind of already covered that. And of course, streamlined order fulfillment. And we'll talk about order fulfillment a little bit later here as well. So after you kind of take an approach of trying to clean up your catalog and get everything tied back to a master SKU, next, what we like to do with folks is to take a look at streamlining fulfillment. What we have found is that growth is usually hampered by operations, meaning that, back to what I said earlier, too often merchants are so busy just trying to keep up the daily order volume that they're not able to invest the time that they need to into growth-related initiatives. And again, throwing people at it really isn't the way to go because you're never going to start increasing your profit margins if you have to just continue to throw people at the problems. And of course, that's obviously a very simplified graph, but what you're shooting for is you want to increase your margin as you grow, leverage your volume as you grow, rather than have your expenses increase at the same rate. So one of the things that we recommend is to deconstruct your fulfillment methods, and this is especially important if you're a multi-fulfillment method merchant. In other words, maybe you're fulfilling some of your orders out of your own warehouse, so you've got a pick, pack, and ship type of a process. You're doing some drop shipping, where the supplier is actually sending that product out to the end customer on your behalf and sending you back tracking information. You're maybe doing some cross-docking, where you've got orders coming in all day long and you're doing a bulk PO to your supplier. They ship you the goods and then you turn around and ship them to the end customer. Or if you're using FBA, or if you're using a third-party logistics provider. Every single one of those fulfillment methods has a different cost basis, and you really need to understand what those underlying costs are and streamline those processes. So again, when we talk about solving issues, anytime you have a repeatable problem or a repeatable task that's being done, there's a lot of lost opportunity there. So when you're looking in your business in terms of how do I start to become more efficient internally, what are some of the red flags that you should be looking at? Copying and pasting is probably the number one thing. Anytime you're going between systems and you're copying and pasting data back and forth, anytime you're doing something in Excel, Excel is a wickedly powerful tool. I love Excel. I use it all the time to do all sorts of different types of analysis. But if you're using Excel as a way to manipulate data and deal with feeds in and out and so forth, that should be a red flag for you. Anytime you're doing manual uploading and downloading, that should be something that's sort of a red flag. And the overall message is stop it. Stop doing that stuff. There are systems, whether it's ours, quite frankly, or whether it's something else out there. There are a lot of different systems that can be helping you with these types of tasks. And the amount of time that you spend doing these types of things really adds up. So to prove that, or to just kind of show how quickly this stuff can add up, I like to kind of just take people through a really quick little exercise. So let's say, just to start kind of small and simple, let's say that you're spending 10 minutes a day, just 10 minutes a day, copying and pasting something between systems, okay? When we look at kind of expanding that out, and we look at what that means per week, 10 minutes a day, 5-day work week, we'll just assume it's 5. I know most of you are probably working more than that, but that's 50 minutes a week. Now if we go to a 50-week work year, right? Now we're talking about 2,500 minutes in a work year based on 10 per day. Now if you were to break that down, that's 41.6 hours. So that's a work week, right? That you're spending by 10 minutes a day throughout the entire year. That's a work week. How many of you could use another week in your year? Well, let's expand that out a little bit, right? So obviously, if we go to 20, well, now we're talking about 100 minutes in a week, and that's 5,000 minutes. Doing the basic math, that's 83 hours, 83.3 hours. 2 weeks, 20 minutes a day. Oftentimes we find that 20 minutes is on the low side. And by the way, that's just one person. How many employees do you have that are doing these types of activities? If we were to say, let's just take a look at 1 hour, right? We look at 1 hour. Well, 5 hours in a week, 250 hours. Let's probably write that down. 250 hours in a year. You divide that out, that's 6.25 weeks. Right? That's a lot of time. And again, that's 1 hour per day that's being, you're doing a duplicate task or something like that. So time really, really adds up very quickly when you're in this business and you're doing things that you shouldn't be doing. 6.25 weeks, if you take that multiplied by a single resource, that's a very, very expensive thing. So too often people get caught up in looking at, how do I grow my top line revenue so I could be more profitable? Well, sometimes you got to take a look at the tasks that you're doing right now that are causing your profit margins to really suffer because you're doing them manually. And it makes it worth it sometimes to invest in systems or processes to help you with that. So we talked a little bit about some of the key foundational concepts that we look at when we do an implementation or when we're helping somebody out. Let's take a look at optimization, right? So now we've got our foundation in place. We've got the key, we've got the catalog in, we've got the relationships, the one-to-many relationships between listings set up. Maybe we set up a couple of suppliers into the catalog as well. Let's take a look at some of the things that you can do to optimize. So a quick little story here. Chris is a gentleman, actually Amazon did a story on these guys a while ago. Olivabel is actually, he named it after a combination of his daughter's names. And he lost his job essentially when Katrina rolled through a number of years ago. And so he started doing some drop shipping on Amazon to try and bring in some income. And it started to take off. So when he came to us, he was only selling on Amazon, and he had one major supplier that he was dealing with. He was managing all of his pricing manually. He was managing 60 to 70 orders a day roughly manually, and dealing with inventory feeds and all that stuff. So when we engaged with him, what we did is we automated the catalog feed into the system. We set up price and availability feeds so that our system was constantly being updated with the number of products and the cost of that. We set up price publishing out to all of his listings on the different channels, started pulling down orders, and then we did EDI integration so that the orders automatically went over to the supplier. They gave us tracking information back, and we published the tracking information out to these sales channels. Now what that did is it essentially completely automated the order side of his business. And he's a drop shipper, and so this is only one of the 5 different fulfillment methods that we support. But in his particular scenario, he was spending 6 to 7 to 8 hours sometimes a day manually dealing with orders. And now all of a sudden, he had a lot more time. So he focused on doing growth-related initiatives. He really became phenomenal at matching to multiple listings out on different channels. But in the first 18 months, he added 2 new sales channels. I think it was Amazon Canada and eBay, if I remember correctly. He added 4 additional integrated suppliers, and he grew his business by 410% in 18 months. And as far as I'm aware, at least at that point in time, that was still just he and his wife that were running that business completely virtually. Now, a quick note of caution here. In this scenario, we leveraged a lot of automation, right? But you have to know your business. You have to know these processes manually before you try and apply too much automation. Computers are a wonderful thing. Trust me, we're in the software business. We love them. Software and computers combined can do things repetitively millions of times and not complain, not groan, not ask for more time off, right? It can do things without complaining. But the thing about automation is that if you don't set it up correctly, it can dig you a hole very, very quickly. So make sure, as it relates to automation as an overall topic, make sure that you know your processes inside and out manually first before you try and automate. And just sort of a funny thing here, Chris sent me this picture about 8 or 9 months after he got started. And my favorite thing here is look at the name of his boat. I got a good chuckle out of that. Only thing he could have done that maybe would have been nicer is if he'd have named it E-tail, but I thought probably would have been a little bit far-reaching, right? So next step in terms of optimization, one of the things that we like to talk about and get people to really think aggressively about is figuring out how you can optimize the inventory that you've got and know going forward what is important for me to invest in. And there's 2 very simple tools that are not unique to our company. These are basic inventory tools that have been out there forever. I can't claim any credit for this. There's what's called an ABC analysis and a gross margin return on investment. And these tools are very easy to do. Every single one of you should have access to this type of data within your business so that you can do this. So let's take a quick look at what that means or what that is. So an ABC analysis is what you need is basically an item number description just so you can identify the item. You need a quantity on hand. You need current and average cost per unit, and you need sales and revenue for that SKU over ideally the last year, but quite frankly, you can do this analysis for any period of time. So if you only have 180 days, don't let that become a barrier. Go ahead and do it, as long as it's consistent across all of your SKUs. And what this gives you then, once you have that data, you can lay it out. You can add another column, sort by total sales from top to bottom, okay? Divide your total sales per line item against the total amount of sales at the bottom of the spreadsheet, and drag that down. And that's going to give you percentage of total sales for every single line item. Okay? For your top 80%, put an A in the first column and drag it all the way down so your top 80% of your items are A items. The next maybe 15% are your B items. The next 5% are your C items. And then I like to create a D as well because oftentimes we find that there are a lot of products that people just flat out haven't sold within that time frame. And it's good to see that. Now when you aggregate that data all together and you take a look at what this really means, it's very, very telling. Now this is data from an actual client of ours that we had a few years back. Unfortunately, when we engaged, they were a little bit too far gone in terms of their purchasing processes in the past, and quite frankly, it darn near killed them, and it was a big problem. Ironically, this isn't too bad. We've seen much worse, but what we're looking at here is, okay, so your A items, top 80% of your sales. Their SKU count in this particular scenario, 17% roughly of all of their SKUs were made up of their A items. There was their 365-day sales. There's the sum of their inventory value, so $1.2 million. Their inventory value for their A items made up almost 47% of their total inventory. So not horrible. Like I said, we've seen it worse. What's really telling here is when you start looking at their B, C, and D items. So the next 15% of their sales made up about 18% of their SKU count. Okay, not too bad. But it made up almost 22% of their inventory value. The next, their C items, 5% of their sales made up 27% of their SKU count and over 20% of their inventory value. And then D items, you've got almost 38% of their SKU count and 11% of their inventory value. When you add together the B, C, and D items there, you're looking at 1.3, well, you're looking at 53% and change of their total inventory is making up less than 20% of their sales. Think about the cash impact that you've got when you've got 53% of your inventory value sitting on your shelves versus you being able to reinvest that money into the inventory that matters. By getting rid of dead inventory and doing this simple analysis and just blowing it out the door if you need to, you'd free up a tremendous amount of cash, and especially if you're doing FBA and so forth, there are ways to really supercharge your sales by investing in fast-moving products. Which kind of takes us to the next little exercise, which is a gross margin return on investment. Now, GMROI is, again, it's fairly simple in concept here in that it's inventory turns multiplied by gross margin. There's a lot of different ways. I'll let you guys Google it on your own to calculate inventory turns. Essentially, the number of an inventory turn is if you move 100 units in a year and you order it 10 times, you've had 10 inventory turns, if that makes sense. So if you multiply your inventory turns multiplied by your gross margin, that gives you a gross margin return on investment. So for example here, if we've got 9 inventory turns and we multiply that by 25% gross margin, we've got a GMROI of $2.25. So what that basically means is that for every inventory dollar you have tied up in that product over the course of a year, your return on that dollar being tied up is $2.25. So when you think about that, what's the inverse of that? What happens if that number is below $1? That essentially means that it is costing you money to have that product sitting on your shelf at this moment in time. So what I typically will recommend is go through this exercise. You all should have access. If you're a multi-channel seller, you're all pretty much going to have access to this type of data. When you combine your ABC with the GMROI, so go through the exercise, do a VLOOKUP, link them together in Excel. I told you I love Excel. But you do that, and you can now see your A items and your B items and C items, and you look at that combined with your GMROI. It's going to become very, very clear to you which products you should be investing in and which ones you should not be. Again, this is looking back. This is not about scouting. This is about based on your existing catalog and the sales that you've experienced. Very powerful exercise. So next, inventory replenishment, and this is clearly related to the previous slide. Fastest way to supercharge your cash flow is to get more efficient on your buying. And to do that, you have to have clear visibility as to what's going on across all of the channels that you're selling on, your complete demand. So we would call that like multi-channel velocity. If you're only ordering or doing replenishment based upon Amazon because you're doing quite a bit of FBA, when you're selling on other channels, you're not getting clear visibility as to what your velocity is, number of units that you're moving per day, per master SKU, and that's going to hurt your replenishment practices, first of all, but it's going to also hurt your buying power because you're not buying as much as you probably should be, and it's clearly a problem. Second, when you're looking at your replenishment activities, you have to understand seasonality and market conditions. We deal with it in a way that we use what's called demand profiles, and the software deals with it, but you could also figure out ways to deal with this internally by kind of creating your own demand profiles. Essentially, you're going to sell more of toys, for example, if you're in that industry. You're going to sell more of those Q4 than you will, maybe Q2. I don't know. I guess I haven't looked at that industry specifically, but logic would say that. So you need to understand when you need to order more based on the seasonal velocity as well as knowing what your multi-channel demand clearly is. And all of this together, you need to get to a point where you can gain clarity on avoiding stockouts. Stockouts are very expensive, and sometimes it's tough to quantify those. But knowing when you need to reorder and knowing how many to reorder is a great way to actually increase your total top-line revenue, because most merchants, by the time that we've started talking to them, we see a tremendous amount of stock out activity. And when you're doing your planning for this, don't try and cut it too thin. Make sure that you're buying enough inventory to not only compensate for the lead times from your suppliers, but you also have to take into consideration any internal lead time that you need. For example, if you're doing FBA, how long does it take you to receive those items and print your labels and then turn around and you've got your inbound shipping time to Amazon FBA, and maybe they're transferring it between locations. Make sure that you plan for hiccups, because supply chains, well, we would love to get them to be absolutely just in time. The reality of that is that in most scenarios that's not always the case, so you need to plan for a little extra safety stock when you're doing that. Otherwise, obviously, the downside is your opportunity cost of lost revenue. Dynamic and integrated pricing. Know your costs. Some of this goes back to the earlier slide where we were talking about how you need to break down your fulfillment methods. We're going to cover that in just a second. And protect your margins. We really recommend kind of using a cost-plus type of an approach. Regardless of whether you're selling on Amazon, where you can do competitive repricing, or whether you're selling on eBay or Newegg or Sears or Rakuten or any of the others, or even on your website, you're going to calculate a price that you're going to sell it on, and you really need that to be built upon real data that's automatically getting updated as you run your business. So when cost changes, so should your prices, or your repricer, as it were. One comment about this: if you're not using a repricer, absolutely you should be looking at using one if you're selling on Amazon. If you're just kind of getting going in the space and your sales are starting to kind of pick up, if you're not currently using a repricer, I can almost, not completely, but I can almost guarantee you're going to see a significant bump in sales. And there are some good little standalone repricers out there that you can explore, that you could use, where you're just manually uploading a floor price and a ceiling price. And if you're not using anything, that's definitely a step in the right direction. I would absolutely recommend that to people who are just getting going. But let's take a look at why we believe that an integrated repricer is so critical, especially when you're talking about scaling an organization. All pricing engines, you ultimately have to come up with a floor or a set price. Now, as we look at Amazon specifically, the general concept of repricers is you've got a floor and you've got a ceiling, and then between those, a repricer is going to kind of do its thing and raise and lower your price. And there's a whole lot of people out on the market right now who are talking about all the theory between those lines of how do you compete between those lines, and what's the gaming. There's gaming theory. There's all sorts of really interesting, fascinating types of concepts. The issue that I keep coming back to, and the reason we focus so much on integration, is you got to ask the question, how did that floor get there in the first place? And people will say, well, I just kind of took the cost in my system and I added in what I played it safe, and I was 15% commission, and then I estimated my shipping costs, and that gave me a cost basis, and then I added margin on top of that and I sent it up. Okay, did you do that every day? Did you do it when your prices changed from your supplier most recently? When you received a new shipment and it was now $1 less per unit, did you update your repricing? Did your repricing, when you said you grabbed the cost per item, did that take into consideration that you're drop shipping some and you're fulfilling from stock on others? There's all these different variables, right? But you've got your product cost, you've generally got your shipping costs, you've got your commission, and then hopefully your profit margin. Those are the biggest buckets, and there's more granularity between that. But again, you have to look at this from a perspective of being aware of how your products are actually being fulfilled. So we've got FBA, you've got shipping from stock, you've got a 3PL, drop shipping, and cross-docking. When we look at product costs, for example, your product cost is going to be perpetual average cost, and you should be able to gain that from your internal systems. It's an asset, you've bought it, you own it, whether it's forward stocked at a 3PL or whether it's at FBA, it doesn't matter, it's your asset, right? You know what you spent on that. But in a scenario where you're leveraging your supplier's inventory and you're either drop shipping or cross-docking, you need to get that item cost from the latest supplier feed, right? Your shipping costs, if you're doing FBA, you should be using the FBA calculator to determine what your fulfillment costs are going to be. If it's from stock, you need to have a table set up so that you can calculate that on the fly and be able to know for a particular product what you want your cost estimates for shipping to be. A 3PL is going to be based upon that relationship with the 3PL. Are they using your negotiated rates? Are they using their own? Are they charging a handling fee, a shipping fee, etc.? That's all going to be unique to the 3PL that you work with. Drop shipping, of course, is supplier specific. Do they charge a drop ship fee? Do they not? Are they using your negotiated rates, their negotiated rates, etc.? What are their rates to begin with? And then cross-docking is you're dealing with inbound freight to you as well as your outbound shipping to the end customer. And all that needs to be taken into consideration. You can see how these costs are different for every single fulfillment method. Commission, of course, then is going to be based on the sales channel and the category. And that needs to be dealt with. So if you don't have a integrated approach to repricing, and if your costs are not changing, as these underlying cost components change based upon the fulfillment method, you're putting the thing that takes the hit over here is your profit margin, and so it's a very important thing that I think oftentimes is overlooked. Next, and then we're going to pick up the pace here a little bit after we get through this particular section, is negotiating with suppliers. Our approach generally is to say price aggressively to start. You want to start driving some volume. Your volume then is going to give you leverage to negotiate discounts. This is an example actually of a merchant that we took through this exercise, and you can kind of see their sales up through, should be able to see this, up through kind of past the holiday season here. They really hadn't done anything, but I had a conversation with this gentleman right in here kind of, where he asked me what channels he should be going on, and I said, well, have you gone back to your suppliers and tried to negotiate some more percentage points first to leverage what you've already got on Amazon? He said, well, how would I go about that? So we came up with a plan for his discussion. We basically said, look, go to them and say, right now I'm doing $30,000 a month with you. I think I can do quite a bit more if you give me another 5 points for 90 days, and if I don't prove that in 90 days we've significantly increased sales, then take it back. Well, he did that, and he went out, and clearly you can see there's the peaks and valleys that were over here on the left. They started to almost disappear. His volume went up significantly. This was, I believe, a religious holiday where he took down all of his FBM listings, and then he went over here, and actually right in here he had another supplier as well. So over the course of, let's see, this is only 8-9 months, dramatic increase just by going back to the table. And if you double your sales and go from 30,000 to 60,000, guess what? That's very significant. If that 60,000 comes in like clockwork to a distributor's rep, he's going to really like you. And if you've done it once before, go back to him again. Get another 3 points. Get another 2 points. Do what you can. This is actually how a lot of merchants who have grown dramatically over the years have been able to get a leg up on their competition, because pretty soon their margins are so good. They've got such strong margins because they're buying so much stronger that they can still compete between the floor and the ceiling. It's just that the difference between their floor and their actual cost is much, much greater, so their margins increased. All right, so we've talked about setting the foundation. We've talked about optimizing the foundation. Now we're going to just talk about expanding a little bit, and then we'll talk about managing growth, and then we'll get to Q&A. So a lot of times what people are looking to do after they've kind of got their foundation in place and they've tweaked it is to look at expanding into new fulfillment models. So we've talked about FBA, shipping from stock, 3PLs, drop shipping, and cross-docking. These can really open up different opportunities for you. Clearly, there's advantages to FBA in terms of your ability to be able to sell under Prime, right? And clearly, when people go to Amazon, one of the first things a lot of Prime members filter on is available by Prime. So if you're not at Amazon FBA, or if you're not using the MFN program for being able to ship Prime from your own stock, you're actually losing a great deal of the audience right to begin with. So Amazon FBA clearly has some serious advantages if you're an FBA or an Amazon seller. Drop shipping and cross-docking, leveraging your supplier's inventory, not tying up all your cash and inventory until you actually need it. Great ways to do it, but you have to have full visibility as to how many they have available and what their current cost is, and have that integrated into all of your publishing routines in order to be able to leverage that. And then obviously you need a supplier that you can work with and trust. And cross-docking in particular, you need some geographic proximity to those suppliers as well, because when you place a bulk PO, by 5 or 6 at night, you want those goods on your receiving dock by midday the next day. And then shipping from stock and using a 3PL or I guess Amazon FBA. Clearly, if you know a product is really moving well, then maybe it makes sense to take an inventory position on that. But again, do that exercise, do that ABC analysis, do that GMROI on a pretty regular basis to make sure that you are investing in the right products, because it's the #1 way to tie up your cash is to spend a ton of money on inventory. And inventory doesn't pay payroll. It doesn't pay rent. It doesn't pay utilities until you convert that into cash. So, be careful there. Supply chain integration possibilities. This is a great area to leverage some automation. Having a catalog automatically come into your system and be updated as the supplier is continuing to add new products and deprecate their old ones. Have that automatically come into your system. Very powerful thing. Price and availability feeds. If they can give you a regular file in a consistent format, whether it's via FTP or they send it to you in an email or they give you an EDI document or maybe access to an XML API, any of that information, if you have a supplier who can give that to you on a regular basis and it's reliable, that could really open up a lot of long-tail sales opportunities for products that you don't want to necessarily stock, but that you want access to be able to sell and just order as you need to. It's a great way to increase the size of your catalog. And then, of course, transactional integrations. If you're either cross-docking or drop shipping, you need to automate what you can, particularly with drop shipping. There's not much reason these days to have to really touch any dropship orders. You may say, well, there's a lot of suppliers out there who don't have the capability to automate. When we're talking about scale and going from dozens into hundreds into thousands of orders per day, frankly, sometimes you have to make some of those hard decisions as to whether it makes sense to work with that supplier or not. At a bare minimum, even if they're not able to completely accept automated a file or whatever to be able to automate the purchasing process, you can certainly automate it on your side. There's nothing that says you can't pull down that order and automatically generate a PO and send it out via an email. So even if they have to rekey it on their side, at least you've made your life a lot simpler. Adding sales channels. This is always a fun discussion, right? We got all the Amazons, we got the eBays, we got the Walmarts, the Rakutens, Newegg, Sears, Jet, shopping carts, deal a day types of things, and really, I mean, what do you do next, right? I mean, there's lots of choices out there, and it's easy to kind of get lost in the weeds as to what do I do next. And don't worry, I'm an equal opportunity offender here, so you're not alone. I mean, everybody goes through these challenges of trying to figure out what's the low-hanging fruit. How do I figure out where I'm going to invest my time now that hopefully I have some because I've invested in my foundation? And I guess I would just say, there's a few things to keep in mind. It's going to be different for each merchant, but you should be looking to see, are there channels in your particular niche? If you're selling aftermarket auto parts, you have to be on eBay Motors. eBay overall is, anywhere from, I guess, 20 to 25% of the size of Amazon. I haven't looked at the numbers here real recently, but eBay overall doesn't usually perform as well as Amazon, but it does in certain product niches, right? Outperforms Amazon in certain product niches. Each channel has some eccentricities. Do you have the infrastructure or team to deal with them? Actually, eBay Motors is a great example when you're dealing with fitment data and stuff like that. And also, you have to remember that not all channels are created equal. More is not necessarily better. And there are some folks out there who are pitching more channels, more sales. The reality is that can be true, but it's not always true, and you don't want to get sucked into that trap of thinking that just by adding a new sales channel, it's going to make your business more profitable. That's what we ultimately have to be concerned about, is profits, right? So when you look at which sales channels do I sell on, you have to be conscious of the fact of the difference in size, right? You can't just say, okay, I checked the box at Amazon and I'm done. Look at the market opportunity that represents as opposed to some of these other sort of third-tier marketplaces. Amazon blows everybody else out of the water. So it sometimes is worth taking more time to try and leverage more opportunities on Amazon versus just saying, hey, what's the other sales channel I can check the box with? eBay. This is, by the way, monthly unique visitors, and this is a couple of months old, so I apologize, but this gives you an idea of scale, which is really kind of the point of the slide. So in a given month, Amazon had, and this month, 85 million unique visitors. That's not counting how many times those visitors came back, by the way. That's just unique visitors. eBay was about half of that. Sears was about a quarter of that. Newegg, Rakuten, and you could go on down the list. Most of those others are in the single digits in terms of millions of unique visitors per month. Clearly, Amazon and eBay are the biggest opportunities in terms of traffic. And another way to look at this is what's their popularity on the web, right? So the sites that are linking into those channels and clearly Amazon is blowing everybody else out of the water. So not all channels are equal, and don't get sucked into that perception, because just adding another sales channel, you may get some sales, but you have to remember you're also adding overhead for your team. You've got to learn how to do business on those channels. It's going to take some time to set up and map your data to those channels. There's going to be internal overhead that comes into play as a result of adding another channel, and you have to make sure that A, you're leveraging a system to do it, and B, you're sure that it's going to be worth your while. All right, so last sort of set here is, let me just do a quick time check. I think we're doing good. How do you manage this going forward? What are the underlying concepts that you need to keep in mind, and what are the types of tools that you need in order to be able to manage this growth going forward? You know, every time you add a different channel, it's not just an equation of addition. It's an exponential equation in terms of the complexities that you add into the mix. And so one of the things that we preach pretty regularly is in a multi-channel world where you're dealing with one-to-many relationships, you really have to embrace systems thinking. And systems thinking is a concept, if you have a few minutes and are curious, this is a great thing to learn about. But to try and simplify it, it's basically an approach to problem solving whereby viewing problems as parts of an overall system, as opposed to you know, if you look at it, the alternative is to reacting to specific parts, outcomes, or events, and thereby potentially contributing to further development of unintended consequences. So in other words, said maybe differently, when you're addressing a particular problem, you know, I want to increase my, well, I may think I have a repricing problem because I'm not driving enough top-line sales and my profits are not big enough. Well, by looking at only just the repricing component, again, this is kind of relevant to our previous slides, your underlying problem is actually a profit problem. So by digging into it, the repricer is a tool, but the issue is actually somewhere else in the system, right? It's, am I getting accurate costs in the first place? Maybe I'm actually selling, and maybe I'm selling more than I should, but my margins are, maybe I'm just recycling money, right? So the systems thinking would say, when you're looking at an individual problem, you have to recognize that there may be other impacts. If you try and solve this independently, there may be other impacts over here or vice versa. And when you're dealing with automation, that's a critical component. So achieving scale, which is a big part of what we kind of focus on with merchants, you know, when you look at this problem, you can't scale if you have to review and make decisions on each item, each order, each whatever, right? When you're talking hundreds, again, thousands of orders a day, you can't do that on each and every one. So what that means really is that to achieve that kind of growth, you need to rely on some automation. To rely on automation, you need clean data, because automation is going to function directly based upon the data that it has. And having updated data requires that the various components of your operational business be connected, right? So maybe another way to look at that, as we look at multi-channel management platforms and what that can provide to you, is that real inventory control requires visibility to all inventory movement. And real visibility requires connectivity to all locations, sales, and channels. So when your inventory count changes, if you're operating a wholesale business off to the side that's consuming inventory, and your online channels are not being updated when that inventory channel or inventory count changes, you've got some serious problems, right? That's how overselling happens, meaning you need connectivity. Connectivity requires the ability to manage the one-to-many relationships between a SKU, its listings, and available suppliers. Lastly, actually a couple more things. So leveraging automation. So automation overall, these are just some of the opportunities. So repricing, inventory, shipment confirmations, purchase orders, automated drop shipping, price and availability feeds, ship rate shopping, profitability analysis overall. I mean, the list goes on, and I'm sure this is not all inclusive. And then lastly, anytime there's copying and pasting. Keep this in mind. When you're looking at how you can grow your business, if you all of a sudden had another hour per day, look at the difference that could make in your business in terms of your ability to pay attention to growth and to actually plan for growth. And lastly, you need some integrated financials. Either integrated or you need a reliable financial system. Estimated gross profitability doesn't really cut it. You need to reconcile your revenues and expenses by channel, by fulfillment method, in order to get a clear picture of what your margins really are. Having an integrated P&L is the only way to know how aggressive you can be on pricing. Right, so you may say, oh, you know what, I think I'll go down to 6% on my profit margin for my pricing rule. Well, what if your business overall isn't making enough money to cover that right now? You may need to get more aggressive on your rules in terms of maybe I need to bump it up to 10% or 15%, but you can't know that unless you're able to look at the bottom line and get clear visibility on your profitability. The underlying concept here is by leveraging systems, leveraging automation, even though it requires an investment, can help you to scale your business and become more profitable. And we've seen this time and time again. Again, when we look at that graph and you see your top line growth and your expenses not growing at the same linear rate, the only way you can do that is to start leveraging automation, which requires clean data, which requires integration. So with that said, again, set the foundation, optimize, expand, and then put growth management stuff in place. I told you we'd come back to this. And overall, this gentleman, that very next year, so he got live on the system, the next full year he didn't hit 20 million. He hit just shy of that. It was 19 point something. And actually the year after that, he was shooting for 60. Actually, that was this last year. He hit 54. So he didn't completely hit where he wanted to go, but his next goal is 100, and quite frankly, he did 6.3 last month. I'm not really betting against the guy at this point. He's done some pretty incredible things. So it's really kind of a phenomenal story. So anyway, with that, that wraps up my presentation, and I think we've now left a little bit of time for some Q&A, and I think, Andy, I'll turn it back over to you for that.
Thanks a lot, Michael. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it. Thanks to everyone for the questions as well. There is still time to submit questions. As I mentioned before, we will overrun by up to 30 minutes to take more questions. So please continue putting your questions in the chat panel now if you have any. We'll try and close off the incoming questions at the top of the hour. So please, you've got 7 minutes or so to get any more that you have in there. We'll run a poll now. Give Michael a little bit of a breather, and just help us assess who you are on the webinar. So you should see that now. It's are you a high volume seller? If you're not looking at the screen at the moment, if you just flip over to the GoToWebinar viewer, you'll see a poll on there, and you can choose one of the questions just by clicking. So it's a fairly arbitrary number here, but we've said around 100 orders a day is what we're classifying as a high volume seller. I'll let that run for just a few more seconds and then show you the results. Okay, so 20% of you are not only at that level of around 100 orders a day, but considerably past that. Another roughly 20%, 18% in the poll, are around that 100 orders a day level. 10% are getting towards it, so that's giving us 50% overall who are at that level or getting there. And then another 50% who are not there yet, but hopefully getting towards that level. So interesting stuff. So Michael, we have got plenty of questions throughout the presentation, so they're touching on various aspects. I'll try and give you and the attendees a little refresher where someone's asking a question that relates to something much earlier on. Okay. So let's start with one from Tom. I think this relates back to when you were talking about different fulfillment methods. So you used examples of an in-house pick, pack, ship, order fulfillment, drop shipping, but the one he's talking about or asking about is cross-docking. I think this is probably the method that is least well known. So he's asking if you could give an example of a business actually using that to help him understand what it is.
You bet. You bet. So cross-docking is essentially a business model used by some very large merchants. Matter of fact, one of our clients is the largest FBM merchant on Amazon, and his business model is entirely cross-docking. His underlying mantra for his business is no inventory, which is unique. But cross-docking is wonderful because it allows you to leverage your supplier's inventory. You get a price and availability feed into your business. Allows you to leverage that data to publish your listings when the orders come down into the system, you're essentially going to queue those, right? So you're going to queue them all day long. Let's say you get hundreds or thousands of orders in a day. You can then run a little wizard that generates a bulk purchase order per supplier, right? And there's underlying logic to determine which supplier should get those orders if you've got some catalog overlap with suppliers. But the underlying concept overall is you're generating a bulk PO for the aggregated totals. So let's say that you've got 10 orders for item XYZ that came in during the day. You're going to have one line item on that PO for a quantity of 10, right? So you're leveraging bulk purchasing power. They're sending you those goods, via pallets or whatever, hopefully that you can receive those the next day. So the reason it's called cross-docking is you're basically receiving it on your receiving dock. You're going to scan it, ship all the orders that apply to that item, send it out on your shipping dock, so cross-docking. Really without any of that inventory ever staying on your shelves. And some people call it just-in-time. There's probably a few different names out there for it, but the underlying concept is you're only purchasing products when you need it, hence you're not tying up all your cash by having that inventory sitting on your shelves.
Okay, thanks for that, Michael. It sounds, my guess is that there's lots of retailers who aren't using that, haven't thought about whether they can make use of it, but it sounds like a very powerful strategy to kind of make more of the resources you have rather than having to put everything on the shelves as you would normally.
It really supercharges cash flow. Yep.
So we've got one from Omar here. He's asking about pricing and reprices, and specifically private label sellers. But if you don't mind, Omar, I'll make this a little broader. So I think the point with private label sellers is part of that strategy is to create unique products. So you're expecting on Amazon not to have competition on the same listing. So maybe you could talk about if repricing, automated repricing is really applicable for any kind of product where you don't have direct competition on the same listing.
Yeah, so in that particular scenario, it may not be that you're in a competitive environment. So repricing as a concept isn't as needed. But keep in mind that controlling your pricing isn't, at least for most merchants who are intending to grow, isn't about managing price on just one channel. This is about global price management. So again, having the underlying tool sets of managing everything at the master SKU level so that, if you're private labeling and you bring in one container at one cost and then you've got another one on the water, and when you receive that one in, now your cost has dropped. Having that perpetual average cost be managed will allow you to just keep your prices moving up and down and always guarantee that margin regardless of the sales channel. So in that scenario, competitive pricing may not be as big of a deal. Now the exception to that maybe is if you have a wholesale business as well. And if you're selling products to your to resellers who are in turn turning around and selling those and attaching to your listings, then leveraging the data that can be generated from a competitive repricer to help enforce MAP policies and things like that can be very applicable.
Okay, so I guess the point, to summarize and tell me if I get it right, there's still a place for automated pricing, even if it's not competitive, because competition is not the only factor that matters when you're setting your prices.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. So we have one here from Naveen, and he's asking about the ABC analysis. So this is the table that you put up showing inventory put into different buckets. You actually had a D there as well, an A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
And the purpose there was to understand, among other things, I think, how quickly you were selling inventory in different categories, and to consider changing your strategy if you had lots of slow-moving inventory, for example. So his question is, you showed stats for a business that was in trouble, but what should those stats look like for a business that's actually healthy and doing well? I guess he's in a position where he wants to look at his own stats and say, I guess no business expects to have everything in the A bucket all the time. So what should that breakdown look like?
Well, by definition, because those percentages, it is a percentage, right? You will always have A, B, and C and maybe D items if you're doing the math right, because
Good point.
even if they're all really fast movers, it's percentage-based formula. So even if even if you're doing really well, you're always going to have that classification. That's where the ABC combined with the gross margin return on investment becomes absolutely critical. Because even if you have C items that are making up the bottom 5% of your inventory, but those items have a $2 or $3 or $4 gross margin return on investment, it's probably worth keeping around. You have to ultimately make that decision, but generally speaking, any products that have a GMROI of less than $1, you should be liquidating that stuff. Get whatever cash you can, get rid of it, start investing in the products that you know are moving. Again, based on how that analysis works, you'll always have ABC products, but the important part is what's your return on the investment in the cash that you're tying up to have those products sitting on your shelf.
Okay, yeah, very good point, Michael. I guess it's a useful thing probably that it is an analysis that always breaks down the top 20% and so on, because as you improve, the analysis will change and enable you to keep working on it.
Right.
Yep. Okay. Just to mention now, we've got to the end of the scheduled time, so we will keep going for up to another 30 minutes or so to take more questions. If you can't stay any longer, then absolutely understand that. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do need to go now, the whole of the presentation and the Q&A is being recorded, so if you need to go, we'll send that to you afterwards, and you'll be able to catch up. But it'd be great if you can stay and listen in for the rest of the questions. So we have one from John here. He's asking about capital. I think this is working capital to, for example, one of the reasons I know that retailers seek loans or other sources of funding is so they can buy in larger quantities of stock and get a better price from their supplier. And I don't think it's something you touched on directly in the presentation, Michael, but I can see it's relevant in that area of financial management and cash flow and working smart with your suppliers. So, any tips for John in terms of seeking capital to help expand his business?
Well, there are some folks out there who specifically provide financing for merchants who are putting stock up at Amazon FBA. Matter of fact, I was at the Prosper show this last week, and there was a couple of folks that I talked to that are doing that. So they're out there. I'm not quite sure what you would Google to look for them. I don't have their contact information in front of me, but there are folks out there who will finance inventory at Amazon FBA, and I assume there's all sorts of terms and conditions that go with that. I've had clients in the past I had one client who I was visiting him in person, and this subject came up, and he opened his drawer in his desk, and he fanned out all the credit cards that he was using to do this. Now that's probably a fairly expensive way to do it if you're not able to pay him off every month. I don't know that I would recommend that. But overall, we have seen, in terms of use of capital, the merchants that are growing the fastest are the ones who are investing in the right products and getting them out to FBA, quite frankly. If you know that a product's going to move, FBA is going to give you some preferential treatment in terms of visibility and the buy box. And we've seen people grow their businesses very rapidly by being able to invest in inventory. And I guess the underlying message to keep in mind is that anything you're spending on in your business that isn't directly contributing to significant value is taking away money from what you could be spending in inventory. And way too often, people forget to look at their shelves in their warehouse and all the dusty boxes that are sitting back there and realize how much money that's worth, and the fact that the stuff that's not moving is preventing them from dramatically growing their top line by reinvesting that money into products that do move. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a lot of products sitting on the shelf, that's the first thing I would take a look at in terms of generating some quick capital. And the more that you start investing that into your A products with a good GMROI, like I said, it's going to supercharge your cash flow. You're going to see amazing things happen within your business if you can free up that cash and use it that way.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Yeah, I think that's a a very good point. I suppose one of the reasons why it's so important to analyze this rather than just relying on your gut feel is that if something's sitting there and not moving, you're not going to see it. You're not, your day-to-day is not, you won't be coming across that inventory. So I guess often it's only by doing that analysis that you learn that there's stuff sitting there.
Yeah, and you do need to, you kind of have to go through that exercise of cleaning house a little bit, because quite frankly, any lender worth their salt is going to want you to be able to prove to them that you know what you're doing in terms of where you're going to spend that money that they're going to loan you. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have tight inventory management processes and a way to analyze, look, all that stuff in the warehouse, I only keep products that meet this criteria, everything else I'm immediately going to start discounting maybe on eBay or whatever to get that cash back and start putting it in fast-moving products. If you can show that you have good, solid processes and analysis and data to back up how you make your buying decisions, I would think you're much more likely to be able to qualify for really any type of loan or what have you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to another one. So this is one from Frank. It's on the topic of replenishment. So when to buy new stock when you're selling through a product line, and how much to buy as well. And I think he's got a good question here, which is when you have a limited sales history, you've got a relatively new product line, how do you estimate replenishment then? And I guess you talked about the seasonal aspect as well. So I think particularly if you've been selling something for 2 months, it's going to be hard to know if a spike's coming your way.
Yep. Yeah. Well, inventory control and replenishment concepts abound. I mean, there's a whole lot of places you can look, and a lot of MBA programs will specialize in these types of things. There's some very advanced concepts out there, everything from, just using a simple min-max type of an approach to using economic order quantities and so forth. It's important to understand that your GMROI is directly tied to the number of inventory turns that you have, right? So you may get a good deal on something if you buy a whole entire container load, but if that's sitting around for 9 months and you can't get through it, you may have a GMROI of 1.1 or 1.2 for the entire year, but if you had turned that many more times, you may have made much more money, right? That's the impact of cash flow, and that's the impact of having a higher gross margin return on investment. So buying more is not always the answer. You may look at it as a great long-term investment, but you have to look at the time value of the cash that you're spending as well. So we could fill up this entire wall and several more talking about a lot of these different concepts, but overall, I think it would probably be, if that's a true sort of question that you have, I would absolutely look at some of the concepts around economic ordering quantities. The way we deal with it in our software and with our merchants is we kind of simplify it down to letting people set a dynamic quantity to stock based upon supplier lead time. So if we talked about all the lead time that you have to take into consideration, and then there's safety stock, and then there's the question of how long do I want to stock for, we usually will set that as, if it's a lead time of 2 weeks, then maybe we set the replenishing quantity to 2.5 lead time, or something to those effects, so that you can you can kind of manage how many turns you're getting in an overall year. Mm-hmm. But clearly, there are people who make their entire living specializing in these things. But it is important to spend the time to educate yourself on these things, because even if you spend a little bit of time and get familiar with some of these basic concepts, it can have a really dramatic impact on some of the decisions that you're making, which will impact your cash.
Yeah, great answer. So let's move back. We've got a follow-up question on cross-docking from Mike and Liz. Okay. So this is a good point, I think, or a good question. So they're asking about next day delivery, or obviously these are big things: next day delivery, same day dispatch. Is that possible with cross-docking? I guess for that to be possible, you'd have to have your supplier very close by and dispatching themselves very, very quickly. So is there, with same-day dispatch and fast delivery generally being such a big driver now in e-commerce, is there a slight downside there? Are there some orders that get lost with the cross-docking method?
So the question is, it's going to be based upon your relationship with your supplier, and it's going to be supplier specific. So cross-docking as a general concept works best when you are within very close geographic proximity. I've got merchants who are doing real serious volume with a distributor that's literally in the same town, and this cross-docker sends their own truck there twice a day to pick up orders. So they sometimes are getting stuff the same day that they've actually received the order and can still meet their shipping deadlines by the end of the day. I've got another merchant who's got multiple cross-dock locations around the country that they're setting up in order to be within a day's time, so they can cross-dock and receive goods the next day based upon where their suppliers are located. I've even got a merchant who is now has placed some cross-dock locations inside the supplier's business and has negotiated a very close relationship where they're putting a workstation inside that business, and essentially they send over the bulk PO, and when the distributor's workers go out and pick the goods, they just bring them to the shipping station of the merchant that we've installed there. So there's all sorts of creativity, and the better your relationship with a supplier, inevitably the more opportunity you're going to be able to leverage in that scenario. But clearly, you know, if your supplier is 2 days away from you, you can't offer 2 days. I mean, it's kind of basic math that way. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So I think this is a good one from Stuart because it relates back to something that you were answering I think 1 or 2 questions ago, and it was I think it originally something you talked about in the GM ROI analysis. So the term inventory turn. So I know you defined it and explained it at the time, but he's kind of asking if you could define it again, and I don't know if there's maybe an example you could give again to help explain what that means.
Sure. So first of all, I would say Google inventory turns. There's probably, you know, a half dozen to a dozen different approaches to calculating inventory turns. I personally am not so stuck up on how you get to the number. I think it's more of it's a type of a trend that you're kind of looking for. And if you use a rough approach to get average numbers to calculate an inventory turn, and it indicates that something is close to $1, then maybe you drill into that in particular item and get more granular. But generally speaking, calculating an inventory turn, you could do it by looking at the number of times you've ordered a product throughout the year, total quantity that you've ordered, and divide that out of the total sales, right? So that would give you the number of times that you've turned your inventory. There's a couple of other approaches. Again, within the top 3 Google search rank results of how do I calculate GM ROI, you probably are going to find a couple of great approaches. But again, I would recommend don't get so caught up in the method. Get rough, get close first, and then drill into what matters from there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good advice in a lot of areas, that you know, approximate knowledge is a lot better than no knowledge. Rather than, if you aim for the perfect, you might end up never getting to any level of knowledge. So something's a lot better than nothing. Mm-hmm. So we have one here from Christian. He's asking about, he's saying his products aren't unique. Amazon sells them too, so he's selling on Amazon, and he has competition from Amazon themselves, which I think is generally quite a scary place to be when you're competing with directly with a company, those kind of resources, and willing to compete on price. So he's asking how do any particular strategies for competing in that scenario, and you know, getting the buy box some of the time without just having to go to such a low price that that there's no margin left at all. Any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different ways to approach that. Kind of back to the same concept of start with the big problems and start working towards the more granular problems. I think in this particular scenario, the first thing you have to be asking yourself is, can you compete? Can you actually compete in this particular scenario? In the multi-channel world, especially as you're talking about dealing with volume of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even into the millions sometimes of SKUs, are some of the things that we've got to deal with. You can't get so caught up on dealing with individual scenarios. So overall, as a recommendation, fight the battles that you can fight and win. We've had scenarios, for example, just being fully transparent, we've had scenarios with repricing, for example, where people will turn on a repricer, and majority of the time anyway, we're seeing some positive bump, especially if they're not using one. We've seen scenarios where there's a dip in sales, and people are asking us, well, what's going on? Well, when we dig into the underlying data, what we realize is that now, because they're taking a cost-plus approach and they're enforcing a margin, they're actually ensuring that they're profitable. They're taking less orders, but when we go back and look, what we found out is that they were taking a lot of orders that they probably should never have taken. They were just recycling money in the past. So their top-line volume was greater, but they weren't making as much money. So, and this kind of applies, I think, to Amazon. You have to understand, can I actually compete in this particular scenario? The answer, by the way, isn't always no, I can't compete. Many times the answer is yes, I can compete. Because maybe Amazon never goes deep in the product, so you need to be there and you need to be available for when Amazon all of a sudden sells out. Maybe Amazon's only buying 1 or 2 products from that particular supplier and you're buying by the container load. Maybe you actually have better pricing than Amazon. It's possible, and it does happen. But if you are in a very competitive space on a product that Amazon typically goes deep on, I would probably tell you start looking at other products because Amazon's big. We all know that. It's pretty tough to compete in some of those scenarios. So unfortunately, it's not a one-answer-fits-all type of a problem. You have to look at your particular case, your product lines, and your suppliers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that did remind me of something I've heard about a few times on that point of Amazon going out of stock. I think sometimes we think Amazon's completely excuse me, Amazon's completely perfect and will always have stock and it will always have the best price. But I think actually there can be a lot of opportunities by waiting for them to go out of stock and monitoring when they go out of stock and gaining an understanding of that, because then you're not competing on price.
Sorry, I was just going to add another point on that is don't be too discouraged if all of a sudden you see Amazon competing on a product line or a manufacturer brand that you sell, even if you're buying directly from that brand, because if Amazon is taking a first-party sale position and taking an inventory position on that product and buying it wholesale from that supplier, it's almost assured that they're not taking the entire catalog. So they may be trying to determine what are the sizes maybe of this particular garment that are really moving fast, and they may take a position there, but you got your XLs and double XLs and triple XLs that they may not be taking a stock position on. So just because Amazon offers that brand and may be buying that brand directly from the manufacturer, it doesn't mean that there's not still a significant opportunity in that catalog.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking for the gaps again. So on to a different one. This is from David. He's asking about systems thinking. So this is something you, I think it's something you mentioned in passing, I think, really, towards the end of the presentation. So I think something that you mentioned is making a change in one area of your overall business process can affect something that happens elsewhere. So he's trying to understand, how that could happen. I don't know if maybe an example of that. And he also mentions the areas of pricing or fulfillment. So I think an example, if you have one, would be useful.
Sure, you bet. So, a lot of times, probably the simplest example would be a scenario where you're dealing with both sales and supply channels. The reality is that as we looked at the different fulfillment methods, your cost basis changes as a direct result of how you're fulfilling that product, right? So if you are shipping from your own stock, you may have a certain cost. Maybe your cost on that product is $10, and that's your perpetual average cost. We know that. If you run out of stock, having an integrated repricer, so again, the systems thinking concept of these things are integrated. An integrated repricer can look at your inventory and see, oops, I'm out of stock. I can't use that $10 anymore. I have to go and look towards my latest supplier feed and grab that data, right? So, and as that data changes, and we look at the supplier feed, well, not only is the cost now $11, but that supplier also has a different fulfillment cost. We've got a drop shipping fee that we have to take into consideration. So the impact of what happens in different places by having integrated data and taking sort of the systems thinking approach of everything is interconnected it allows us to be able to leverage data in a lot of different ways, which is going to reduce dramatically the amount of time that you spend trying to accomplish these things manually, as well as increase your sales opportunities in your sales channels, because instead of just running out of stock and not being able to publish inventory, we can still publish inventory. It's just from a supplier. So you're not taking your listings down just because you don't physically have stock. You've still got access to the product. So, and hopefully if it's a fast-moving product, you've set up replenishment so you don't run into that situation, but you get the point, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And is system thinking one of those things where it's experimentation is important? So you have this system where everything's interconnected, and making a change in one place can kind of have a butterfly effect, and something changes in a place you weren't expecting. So is it important to treat it like an experiment and try making a change, one change at a time, and then see what happens?
It can be. It kind of depends on the subject, though. When you get into fulfillment, you want to make sure that once you've got things fine-tuned and it's working, you don't throw a whole bunch of monkey wrenches into it. So generally speaking, once you've got that foundation set, let it be solid, right? Mm-hmm. But speaking of systems thinking, I was just thinking of what examples could I give that would bring that really home. We have a merchant who's in the hardware business, for example, who works with a supplier who's got 50 different DCs, distribution centers around the country. And we get a inventory feed from them that gives us inventory availability by location. Okay, now they have a cross-dock location that's right in their backyard, and that's clearly the cheapest way for them to fulfill. But that cross-dock location only carries about 33% of the catalog, right? So there's literally tens of thousands of products that they could be drop shipping. They just don't have access to as a cross-dock location. And so, this is another example of integration in that the repricer looks at availability based upon the fulfillment method, automatically then adjusts pricing based upon, okay, is this available? Is there inventory available in this specific location, and can I cross-dock it? If so, I can have a more aggressive price. If it's not available in this location, then convert the fulfillment method, use all your drop shipping costs, set the floor based upon how it's going to be fulfilled. So you're doing that in advance of even taking an order. And then there's all sorts of integrated stories we could talk about in terms of order routing based upon once the order comes in and how that's dealt with. But generally speaking, automation can only happen by having good data, so you need the data integration. And automation is truly what then allows you to be able to scale your business without having to add people at the same linear rate. Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. So I've got one here that's a different topic again. It's from Mark, and he's asking about different sales channels. So that is something you touched on in the presentation. You talked about how there's lots of sales channels out there, but they're not all equal. Each one has to be assessed on its own merits. So what he's particularly mentioning is, as I think a lot of us will have experienced, that pay-per-click advertising like Google AdWords is very costly and a good way to burn through lots of cash. So I guess he's probably tried that and discovered that problem. He's also talking about Google Shopping and asking if it's a viable channel. I guess that's going to be one of those questions where it depends, but maybe there's something, generally speaking, some advice you could give about assessing new sales channels and how to dip your toe in the water in a channel and figure out for yourself if it's going to be a good channel for you.
Yeah, so this is a multi-layered question actually, because when you're assessing a new market, let's say you're selling on Amazon and you're assessing other marketplaces, you don't have to change a whole lot of the rest of your infrastructure in order to be able to add a new marketplace, okay? But there's three different primary types of online sales channels. You've got marketplaces, you've got the deal-a-day sites, so the Groupon Goods type of Living Socials type of sites, and then you've got sort of your website type of business. And selling on your own website believe it or not, it's an incredibly different business model than leveraging marketplaces. Marketplaces, the benefit of marketplaces is that they bring the eyeballs, they bring the traffic. You don't have to spend a nickel to get eyeballs on your product. You pay for it, obviously, in the commission after the sale happens. But the difference is that when you're selling via your own website, if you don't currently have a website, I would ask you to really dig in and really look at what the real costs are going to be and understand the full entire business model before you sink money into building a website. We have directly witnessed people putting $50,000, $100,000 into these really advanced sites because they've got large catalogs and they've got all these data management things. They've hired developers internally. They've hired content people internally to stand up websites. They get it all live, and then they don't have a strategy as to how to drive traffic. That's equivalent to building a beautiful retail location on a dirt road somewhere 50 miles away from the nearest city. You have to get traffic to that site in order to be able to generate sales. And if you don't have somebody who really understands how to drive eyeballs, you could spend a tremendous amount of money and time, especially because you have to really get your content organized in order to be able to put all your items online. You have to have good images, you have to have good descriptions, good all of that stuff. It takes a lot of time, as opposed to, so for example, matching a UPC on Amazon and starting to sell like that. So tremendous amounts of different, I guess, internal overhead is going to be required based upon those decisions. So if you're within one of those categories and you're just saying, I'm going to add another marketplace, or I'm going to add, I'm selling on Groupon Goods, I'm used to the model, I'm just going to add, Deal Finder, whatever. That industry turns a lot, but or Choxy, which used to be No More Rack, for example, or staying kind of within those business models is a lot easier to expand into versus saying, hey, I've never done a website before, let's dig into that. So I could talk about that for quite some time, so apologize, that was a long answer, but hopefully that provides a little perspective.
That's great, Michael. I guess, as you said before, with all of these things, there's lots of content to it. There's lots to learn, lots to understand. So I think everyone understands that they're not going to be able to get an answer now that they can walk away with, and suddenly their problems are solved. So let's take just one last one, because we've nearly come to the end of our extra time. There are a few questions that we didn't get to, so I'll let you know what we'll do to try and help you with the questions that we didn't get time for after this next one. So we'll make this the last one. It's from Howard. He says he agrees that repricing is important. But is there also value in constant price movement? So having prices change by a small amount, maybe even just a cent or a penny, to push listings ahead in the rankings on Amazon. So I guess this is a very much a competitive-driven repricing approach, and trying to take advantage of, I guess, Amazon's buy box algorithm to sort of make a tiny adjustment to see if you can get that further ahead. Is that something people should be doing, as well as a kind of cost-driven pricing?
So as with some of the other questions, it's unfortunately it's not a simple yes or no. I'll give you an example here. We have a merchant who's a top 5 Amazon seller with one of their accounts, but they've got 3 accounts in the top 100 in Amazon. They have 8 million SKUs. So in a given hour, we receive a little bit more than 1 million, usually, repricing notifications from Amazon via the subscription API. There's some duplicates, and there's a bunch of different things that don't matter that we strip out. But inevitably, that's going to end up at anywhere from 450 to 500 plus thousand repricing updates in an hour. That's the first reason I would tell you that if you're not using a repricer, you need to be. There's no way a human can click fast enough to keep up with the tools that are out there, and we're just one example. To a certain extent, between the floor and the ceiling, it's a bit of an arms race, and I steal that term from my partner and CTO, Clyde Siegel, who kind of brings that up and saying, look, everybody's got access to the same data between the floor and the ceiling. How you price between that floor and ceiling, there's all sorts of gaming theory and strategy and so forth. At the end of the day, though, you need to make sure that your floor is solid and that you are making profit. In terms of how frequently you reprice, it kind of depends on the size of your catalog, for example. So even if we can turn around and in certain scenarios we will, like that very large merchant I just mentioned, every time we reach a few thousand updates, we're sending that file. So that can happen in just a minute or two sometimes in that scenario. But you also have to keep in mind that Amazon still has to process that and put that out onto the website. If you've got a very large catalog, thinking that you can reprice just one item over and over and over and over again, I suppose we could manually tweak it so that it jumps in front of the line in front of everybody else. but you have to look at practically what difference does it make. Just saying yes, I suppose in generic theory that might be true, but the reality is, it's not quite that simple, and the size of your catalog definitely is going to have to come into play.
Yeah. Okay. It makes sense. So we've come to the end of the Q&A now, and thank you to there's still lots of people here, so thank you very much for hanging on with us, and I hope it's been really valuable for you. I've found it really interesting. So just a few bits of housekeeping and information that you might find useful. If you've asked a question and we didn't get a chance to answer it, that question will be passed on to Michael and his team, and they'll do their best to catch up with you and help you with that. If you had a question but didn't get a chance to ask it, or couldn't quite formulate what you wanted to say, maybe, then Michael will put up the contact details again for eTail, so you can contact them. There's a special contact form on their site that you can use to get in touch. There it is, info.etailsolutions.com/web-retailer, but it's on the screen now. So this is being recorded, so we'll circulate the recording in a few days to everyone who's attended and also everyone who's registered. So if you know that a friend of yours maybe couldn't make it today, then yes, they will get a recording, so they'll be able to see everything. If you want to keep abreast of future webinars that we're hosting at Web Retailer, I think most of you here are probably members already, but if not, you can join up at webretailer.com. It's free, and we'll let you know when we've got something coming up next. After you leave the webinar, there'll be an exit survey shown automatically. The link for that's also in the follow-up emails. So it really is very useful feedback that you've given us so far in those exit surveys to help us make these webinars as useful as we can for you. So please do try and take the time to fill that in. And the only thing that remains now is to say a very big thanks to Michael and eTail Solutions. He's spent a lot of time presenting and answering all your questions, so really appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Also, very big thanks to everyone attending. I know it's a big deal to spare an hour or even 90 minutes of your time. So I think it's been a great presentation and some great answers to the questions from Michael as well. So thank you for spending all that time with us. And I'd just like to hand you over to Michael now to say a few final words.
I think you pretty much said it. The contact information is on the screen. If you'd like to discuss any of this stuff in greater detail, feel free to reach out to us. Happy to schedule the time to get together, or if you feel like taking a look at our application, by all means hit our website and fill out a form. We'll have somebody reach right out to you, and we'll go from there.
Thanks, Michael. We'll leave that up for a few minutes now, so you can take down the details if you don't have them. But that's it. We'll wrap up, and thanks again to everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody.